The story begins with a girl named Demi. She had been unconscious for a long time, and when she finally opened her eyes, she found herself completely alone. She was on a small boat, surrounded by nothing but the endless sea, with no one else in sight, not even her partner. Fear gripped her as she wondered how she had ended up stranded in the middle of the ocean with no resources. To understand this, we need to go back a little in time. A few days earlier, Demi had arrived on an island. She didn't have a steady job. Her passion was exploring new places, meeting people, and building connections wherever she went. She barely had any money, surviving mainly on the kindness of strangers who tipped her in return for small favors during her travels. This had been her way of living for quite some time. For Demi, the goal was to see as much of the world as possible before growing old. Money, she believed, could always be earned later, but life was meant to be explored, not wasted. During her time on the island, she met a man named Richard, a local fish seller who had been in the business for many years. They talked a lot, and Richard eventually invited her to dinner, which turned into a warm and friendly evening. Demi was impressed by his photographs and stories of traveling. Richard, much like her, loved exploring and had already seen half the world. At one point, Demi even felt jealous of the experiences he had, because she longed to travel that way too. Richard told her about the dangers of being out in the middle of the ocean, the sleepless nights, the lack of resources, the constant struggle to survive. Yet he also insisted that such experiences were worth it because they gave life meaning and left no room for regrets. Inspired, Demi declared that she wanted to go with him on his next adventure. And so, the next day, Richard took Demi out to sea, and together they began exploring. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, sharing everything with each other. It was clear that they were falling in love, even though neither had confessed it yet. Eventually, a billionaire client approached Richard with a request. He needed his yacht delivered to California but had no experienced pilot to take it there. In return, he offered Richard a large payment and a business-class ticket back. It was an incredible deal, but Richard had one condition. He asked for 2 tickets, planning to take Demi with him. When he explained the opportunity to her, he also promised that this journey would allow them to explore even more together. This journey was something they were destined to take, and the bonus was that Richard was being paid well for it. At first, though, Demi hesitated and told him this was his job. He should just finish it quickly and safely on his own. But Richard gently explained that he had explored the world alone long enough, and ever since meeting her, he wanted to experience every new adventure with her. It was obvious that Richard had fallen in love with Demi. Hearing his heartfelt words, Demi couldn't say no anymore, and she agreed to join him on the journey. They received the yacht and set out toward California. Both were excited, since this would be their longest trip together. Not long into the voyage, Richard finally confessed his feelings and even proposed marriage. Demi laughed joyfully, said yes, and hugged him. They were now officially in love, hoping only for a safe journey to California. Demi had initially been nervous because she was originally from California. She had left years ago to pursue her life of exploration, but now, with Richard by her side, she felt no fear, only the thrill of sharing this adventure together. Neither of them had any idea, though, of the danger that awaited them. Hours passed as they sailed forward, until suddenly, Richard spotted a small bird flying nearby. Both were startled. It didn't make sense for such a small bird to be so far from the coast, deep in the middle of the ocean. Richard grew suspicious and scanned the horizon, but nothing was clear. Demi grew uneasy, wondering if it was a sign of danger. Richard checked the radio, and soon enough, the news confirmed his fears. A massive storm was headed directly along their path to California. It was going to hit in just a few hours, and it was far more dangerous than they expected. Richard told Demi everything, and she too became afraid. Together, they decided to change course temporarily, wait out the storm, and then return to their original route. It seemed like a good plan, but things didn't go the way they hoped. Within hours, the storm grew rapidly and swallowed them in its fury. Towering waves rose high enough to sink even a massive ship. Their small yacht was violently tossed around, already taking heavy damage. Richard urged Demi to go inside for safety, but she refused to leave his side. She had been with him from the start and wanted to face everything together, no matter what. Still, realizing the risk, Richard convinced her to stay inside while he battled the storm on deck. But the waves grew higher and the storm more violent. The yacht shook with brutal force, so much that Richard was thrown overboard into the raging sea. Inside, Demi struck her head against the cabin wall and lost consciousness as water flooded into the boat. The storm raged for hours. When Demi finally regained consciousness, she stumbled outside to find the storm had passed. But Richard was gone. She screamed his name desperately, calling out again and again, but there was no sign of him. All around her was nothing but endless ocean, no shore in sight, no rescue coming. Even the radio offered no response. Demi, who had dreamed of sharing beautiful moments with Richard on this trip, now found herself utterly alone, stranded in the middle of the sea, her love lost to the storm. Obviously, after falling into the raging sea, Richard couldn't have survived, or at least, that's what logic said. Deep down, Demi knew this too, but she refused to accept it. She couldn't bear the thought of her lover dying such a terrible death. She spent hours drifting in despair, replaying Richard's words about exploration in her mind. She had wanted to see and feel the adventures he had described, but she never imagined they would turn into something so painful. With no rescue in sight, Demi began to weaken from dehydration, even losing consciousness for a while. Survival seemed impossible. In situations like this, tourists often make the deadly mistake of drinking seawater. But the salt content is far too high, it dehydrates the body even faster, causing it to burn through energy reserves until collapse. The smarter choice is to collect rainwater, if possible, or catch fish with a makeshift net. Even a small piece of bait could lure one in. And the most important rule, never give up. Reports of castaways surviving weeks or even months at sea all shared one thing in common: sheer determination. Demi knew if she followed these principles, she had a chance. Snapping back into focus, she scanned her surroundings. That's when she spotted a floating piece of wreckage, and on it, miraculously, was Richard. Against all odds, he was still alive. Without a second thought, Demi jumped into the water, swimming toward him. But he was farther away than she realized, and with the current picking up, the boat itself was drifting. Dark clouds gathered again, it looked like another storm might return. Torn between saving Richard and saving the boat, Demi made the hardest decision: she swam back to the yacht. Without the boat, neither of them would survive. She rushed to repair it. First, she patched the holes and bailed out the water flooding the deck. Then, with painstaking effort, she reset the sails to regain control. It took everything she had, but eventually she managed to steer the battered boat back toward Richard. When she reached him, Richard was unconscious, clinging weakly to the overturned dinghy. Most of his body was submerged, and his legs weren't moving at all. Demi tied a rope around his torso and hauled him up with all her strength. He was badly injured, his legs were broken, his ribs cracked, his skin blistered and fragile from the hours in saltwater. He desperately needed medical treatment, but all Demi could do was improvise. She splinted his legs with pieces of wood and tied them tight to give him some support. But they were still stranded in the middle of the endless ocean. No land in sight. No food. No water. Demi had saved Richard's life for now, but how long could they last like this? Days passed, the winds weakened, and their boat crawled forward at a snail's pace. It was beginning to feel like they would die slowly in the vast, merciless sea. Drawing on his experience, Richard tried to calculate where they were. Soon he realized they had drifted far off course from the route to California. They were trapped in a dead zone of the Pacific, no winds, no islands, no rescue ships ever passing through. Staying here meant certain death. Their only chance was to sail toward the routes where ships might appear. But Richard explained the grim truth: if they headed toward California from this position, it would take months. The winds along that path were painfully slow. And worse, they had food left for only a week. After that, survival would be a question only fate could answer. Demi grew terrified. "Maybe we're just going to die out here," she whispered. But Richard, despite his broken body, spoke firmly. He had faced similar situations before. "You can't lose hope. You have to keep moving forward. That's the only way." Demi listened closely, but she had her own idea. Instead of California, why not try for Hawaii? The winds in that direction were strong, which meant their boat would be pushed much faster. And with more traffic along that route, they had a better chance of running into a rescue ship. Richard argued at first, but eventually, he agreed. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only one. Richard also pointed out another harsh reality: they would have to start catching fish. It was the last path to survival. Demi recoiled. She was vegetarian, and the thought of killing a fish made her sick. But survival leaves no room for morals. With a heavy heart, she agreed. Following Richard's guidance, she dove straight into the sea, trying to catch fish with her bare hands. But she failed miserably, not a single catch. Exhausted, she climbed back onto the boat, empty-handed. Richard's morale sank even further. Both of them wore despair across their faces. In all his years of sailing, Richard had never faced a journey this dangerous. In chasing love and adventure with Demi, he had ignored weather forecasts and warnings about storms. Now, because of that choice, they were stranded in the middle of an endless ocean. Days bled into nights. Their supplies dwindled to nothing. Richard's condition worsened. He desperately needed medication, but out here, that was impossible. His body burned with fever, and dehydration clawed at him. Then, one night, hope appeared. A massive cargo ship loomed in the distance, heading their way. Demi and Richard waved frantically, shouting with all the strength they had left. But the ship was too massive, its crew too far above to notice two tiny souls in a broken yacht. Their screams went unheard. The ship sailed past, disappearing into the horizon. Hope, once again, slipped through their fingers. Richard, the man who once lectured about never giving up, finally collapsed. Feverish, delirious, he fell unconscious. Both of them were dehydrated, their bodies breaking down. Suddenly, strong winds returned. Demi panicked. Was another storm coming? She quickly secured everything on the boat, bracing herself. If a storm hit now, they were dead. But luck, for once, spared them. No storm came, only powerful winds that pushed their boat forward at high speed. Still, Richard's body was failing. His legs were rotting, his wounds infected. He barely responded when Demi spoke. She lay down beside him, clutching him tightly, whispering words she wasn't sure he could even hear. In that moment, stripped of everything, their true love revealed itself, tested and proven in the darkest of conditions. Demi began telling Richard about her childhood, how her father used to take her to new places, showing her the world. But because of her grandparents, she could never spend much time with him. They were cruel and never wanted her to stay close to her father. From the very beginning, Demi was deprived of her parents' love. Yet with Richard, she felt everything she had once missed. Together, they kept waiting on the boat, clinging to hope. But one morning, when Demi woke up and looked around, Richard was gone. In his place, she saw only that same piece of driftwood floating beside the boat. The truth hit her hard. Richard had never been there at all. Everything she had seen and felt was only her imagination. Richard had been swallowed by the raging sea that night, lost to the merciless storm that tore the sky apart. The waves had risen like mountains, crashing with a violence that could snap wood like twigs and drag men to their graves. Demi had screamed for him, her voice breaking against the roar of thunder, but the storm was deaf to her cries. One moment, he was there, clutching the boat with all his strength. The next, he was gone, pulled under by the black waters as if the ocean itself had claimed him. From that day forward, Demi lived only on the memory of him. Richard's words replayed in her mind like an endless echo. His stories, tales of distant lands, adventures across uncharted seas, kept her company in the suffocating silence of isolation. At night, when the stars flickered faintly above her, she imagined his voice whispering reassurances, guiding her through the darkness. It was as if her desperate heart refused to let him die completely. She conjured him beside her, his presence as real as the waves lapping against her boat. At first, the truth destroyed her. Realizing Richard was gone felt like a blade carving through her chest. She wept until her body was too exhausted to shed another tear. Yet when the exhaustion faded, reality pressed upon her with cruel force. She had no choice, either surrender to despair and perish, or fight to live on. And so, through trembling lips and a breaking spirit, Demi chose survival. She clung to Richard's teachings as if they were lifelines. He had always told her that the sea respected those who respected it, that endurance was stronger than strength. With that, she forced herself to endure the impossible. She dove into the cold, merciless waters, her body shaking with hunger, to snatch fish with her bare hands. She learned to dry them under the sun, to ration each bite so that her body could last one more day. Salt crusted her lips, her hands blistered, her face burned under the unrelenting sun. Yet through every trial, she whispered to herself, "For Richard." And then, fate sent a sign. One morning, as she sat weak and half delirious, a small bird landed on the side of her boat. Demi froze, her breath caught in her throat. Birds never came this far out into the endless blue desert of the sea, unless land was close. With trembling fingers, she raised her binoculars. She scanned the horizon. And then she saw it, faint, blurred by the haze of distance, but unmistakable, the outline of an island. Her heart thundered in her chest. Tears blurred her eyes, but she refused to look away. That island was hope. That island was survival. Clutching the oar with all her remaining strength, she turned the boat toward it, fighting the stubborn winds that tried to push her back into despair. Her arms screamed in pain, her muscles begged for rest, but she pushed forward. Every stroke of the oar was a rebellion against death. But destiny had one more miracle to give. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the ocean in gold and blood-red hues, a massive silhouette emerged on the water. A ship. Not just any ship, a Japanese naval vessel, gliding like a guardian across the waves. This time, Demi would not let hope slip away. Summoning strength she didn't know she had, she stood and waved with both arms, her voice raw from screaming, her soul pouring out in each desperate cry, "Here! Please!" And for once, the sea answered her prayers. The ship turned. Sailors rushed to the edge, shouting in disbelief at the sight of her. They lowered ropes, hands reaching out to pull her to safety. Someone draped a blanket over her trembling shoulders. Another offered water, the cool liquid stinging her parched throat as tears spilled down her face. She tried to speak, and in broken words, she told them her story, how she had survived, how the sea had taken Richard, how she had drifted for endless days with nothing but memories to keep her alive. The sailors, hardened men of the sea, stared at her in awe. Her endurance was nothing short of miraculous. They tied her battered boat to their ship, and with solemn vows, promised to return her to safety. After an ordeal that felt eternal, Demi was finally rescued. But freedom from the sea did not free her from grief. Her heart still belonged to Richard. When she returned to the island where their paths had first crossed, it was like walking through a ghost's embrace. Every corner of the place whispered his name. Days passed, but his memory never loosened its hold. One afternoon, she stepped into Richard's old home. The air smelled faintly of wood and salt. Her eyes fell upon the walls, covered in photographs. Pictures of Richard standing proudly beside his discoveries. Pictures of vast oceans, towering cliffs, endless skies. And there, among them, one picture of her with him. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She had loved only twice in her life, her father, who had been her first anchor, and Richard, who had been her compass. Both were gone. Both had been torn from her by fate. Yet in her pain, a new resolve was born. Richard had once told her that the world was too vast to be left unexplored, that life itself was an endless horizon. Demi understood then, she could not stop. Adventure was her calling. Survival was her destiny. And Richard would have wanted her to continue. On her last evening at the island, she walked to the shore, the waves curling gently at her feet. In her palm lay the ring Richard had given her, a promise of love, of journeys together, now left unfinished. With trembling hands, she held it out to the ocean. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Rest now, Richard. You will always be with me." And then she let it fall, watching as the sea swallowed it gently, not as a goodbye, but as a gift of peace. Thus ended Demi's chapter with Richard. But her story was far from over. And now, dear viewers, I turn to you. Did this journey stir something in your heart? If so, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if Demi's struggle and courage touched you, even for a moment, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back soon with more unforgettable stories. Until then, farewell.